As you can see, it's no longer summer. And like the animals of the forest, we're thinking about putting away food for winter. I'm Elliot Coleman.
And I'm Barbara Damrosch. And if you'll stick with us for the next half hour, we'll show you some good ideas on harvesting and storing root vegetables.
On gardening naturally. Barbara and I like to work together when we harvest, and we each have our own equipment. I brought the harvest buckets, a knife, and one other piece of equipment, these waterproof pants. I'm going to be on my knees, and this is going to make my life a lot more pleasant.
And I've got a digging fork. I'm going to go along the row and loosen the carrots so they'll be easier for Elliot to pull out.
And as I pull them, oh, isn't that a nice carrot? I'm going to carefully cut the top off with my knife about a quarter inch above the carrot. I cut it off because this would rot in the storage bucket and wouldn't do us any good. We're not going to eat it anyway. And this gives me a nice carrot to put in. No need to wash them, no need to worry about that. They're going to go into the cellar, and they're going to be in the same conditions practically that they were here, cool and damp, and they're going to store well.
If we lived in a warmer climate, we could leave these carrots in the ground without protection. But here, it's not going to be too long before the ground freezes solid, so we're harvesting them today.
Do I pick all of them? Oh, yeah, if they look nice, but occasionally there's a small one that isn't perfect, and I'll just leave that here with the carrot tops. That'll eventually go to the compost heap. But basically, this is just a simple one-step process. Cut the tops, put them in the harvest bucket, and it goes to the cellar. Couldn't be easier. Beet harvest is a lot like carrot harvest. Barbara loosens them with a fork. I pull them and top them, only this time I'm going to top them a little higher, about a ½ inch above the root. I want to make sure that I'm not going to cut into that root and make it bleed.
It's even more important to get beets out of the ground before the really hard frost than it is with carrots. They really can't take a lot of frost.
So if you expect real cold weather, you can only get one thing harvested. Do the beets first.
Now, the potatoes were ready to be harvested about a month ago, so Elliot dug those then.
If you're going to harvest potatoes for storage, you want to wait until the tops die down. This is a later variety, and their tops are still green. But this early variety, that's ready to harvest. When the tops die down, you know the potatoes are mature. When the potatoes are mature, their skins are hardy enough to withstand the rough and tumble of harvest. Now, if our soil were hard, I'd probably use a fork to harvest them, but we have a pretty loose, open soil, and I can do it with my hands. I've often thought this process was very much like an Easter egg hunt. When you hunt in here, you never know what you're going to find. So I'm going to pull the mulch aside and start digging potatoes. This is my favorite variety, an egg-shaped European type called Charlotte. They're very productive, yellow-fleshed, and probably the most delicious potato anyone would ever want to eat. Here's a root crop you may not be familiar with. This is celeriac, also known as turnip-rooted or knob celery. And as you can see, instead of the usual stems, it grows a round root that you can store over the winter. Now, when the conventional celery, which you all know well, at about this time of year, it's pretty much gone by. And so this is the one we move into and get a whole season of winter soups and stews.
I also like to cut it up really thin and put it in a salad with a vinaigrette or mayonnaise dressing.
Now, when you harvest celeriac, you cut off the top as you did the other roots, but with this one, you also want to beat all that soil out of the roots before you put it in the bucket. No need taking that to the cellar. And you could cut off the roots now, but I find it keeps better if I don't. I just cut off the top, ½ 3/4 of an inch above the top, leave these on. Of course, when we take it to the kitchen to use it, I'll cut those off then. When talking about any tools, it's always fun to know what the pros use. What do they use for harvesting? Something like this field knife, very popular on large-scale farms. And it's strong. You can cut through solid stems with it. Other designs that are popular, little curved ones like this knife. Again, it fits around the stem of what you're trying to cut. Possibly easier to find than this is just an old linoleum knife. Keep it sharp, probably pick one up at a tag sale. Again, it curves around the stem to cut. What do I use? Just a little serrated edge kitchen knife like this. That's my favorite. It's sharp, it's light, and has a red handle, so I'm very unlikely to lose it if I drop it by chance in the garden. Another great fall crop is the rutabaga. Now, I realize the rutabaga is a relative of the turnip and may have a bad reputation, but this is wonderful peasant food. You pull it out of the ground, again, just cut the top off like we've done all along, but you take a rutabaga, mash it together with about half mashed potatoes and serve those, and it'll be one of the best meals you've ever had.
Lots of butter. Don't forget the butter.
Lots of butter.
That'll get us through the winter without starving.
Absolutely. There are two ways to deal with Brussels sprouts in the fall. If you leave the whole plant like this, just the way it grows, you can harvest sprouts progressively from the bottom up, and you'll see they're bigger at the bottom. And one other advantage of this is, if you leave them in the ground late, all these leaves tend to droop down over and provide wonderful frost protection for the sprouts underneath. But if you're in a hurry, there's another way to do it, and that involves cutting the top of the plant off. Let me show you. If you want to speed up the Brussels sprouts, sometime around the end of August, cut that little top off. And what that does is encourage the sprouts all along the stem to get big all at once. But there's one more thing you can do if you do this, and you want to put these away to store before it gets too cold. Just break all the branches off like that. Take a knife, cut the whole stem off, and then you have a wonderful storage unit that you can put away into the refrigerator or the cellar, and it'll last for another 3 weeks. One of the best ways to store cabbage is not to cut the head off, but to leave the head on the stem and the roots together. So when I do that, I just break off the leaves, and then I'm going to pull this whole unit as it is. The reason is, it keeps better that way, but there's a second bonus. When I bring this head into the kitchen in the middle of the winter to eat it, I replant the stem and the roots in a bucket of damp sand in the window, and it grows me a couple of meals of delicious cabbage greens out of the sprout spots along the stem. My favorite containers for root crop harvest and storage are these recycled 5-gallon used plastic food buckets. It's a food-grade plastic, they're easy to clean, they're easy to find, and they're really inexpensive. Now, on a commercial scale, storage is done in large crates like these, also made of plastic. If you can find them, they're great, they hold a lot more, but the best thing is to learn something from them. Notice how they have ventilation holes in the bottom to let air in, and that's important when root crops are stored in a container like this. They also have some other neat features. When you stack them one way, they stack on top of each other. If you turn them, they nest inside for storage at the end of the season. Well, I'm going to learn and put holes in my buckets, and I do it with just an electric drill. About a 1/2-inch drill bit, make the holes, and then they'll ventilate. And when I want to stack them, I just set them in the cellar like this and alternate them like that, and I can stack these also. But the best thing about them is this is a one-step process. I go to the garden, harvest the roots, carefully put them in here, carry them to the cellar, and I never handle them again. This old farm root cellar is not the sort of structure most of us have in our backyard, but it offers a wonderful example of the things that make good root storage work. Let's go inside and see what lessons it has to teach us.
Boy, I'm glad we brought that lantern. It's dark down here.
Yeah, well, I'm glad it's dark down here. Dark is one thing that's good when you're storing root crops. Here, I'll stack that right on top of there.
And I'll go get those red cabbages.
Great. Root crops keep best if they're given the same conditions in storage that they had in the ground. Cool, moist, and dark. And that's why an underground cellar works so well, because it has all those conditions. But this is a particularly good cellar for a number of other reasons. First, it's all made out of concrete. So there's no wood or any other material down here that can rot or spoil. And that means this cellar is impenetrable. And that's important because if there are rodents out there trying to get in, they can't get into this cellar and eat your produce before you do. The underground room is that it's damp. And you want to help keep it damp because a high humidity is really important to keeping your root crops for the whole season that they're in here. So I keep a bucket of water in the cellar. And every so often, when I come down, I splash some water on the floor, whether the floor is dirt, pebble like this, or concrete, and that water will slowly evaporate and add to the humidity of the cellar. And the third thing that's important is to keep it cool. And that we do because the natural system is helping us. In the fall, the weather is cooling down. It isn't quite cool enough, but we encourage it by having a cool air vent in the door out there that lets cool air on frosty nights down in here, and a warm air vent in the top of the cellar that lets the warm air out. Remember, cool air is heavier than warm air. It falls down in here. The warm air rises out. And all that Mother Nature is doing, we have a natural convection of air that cools the cellar down long before the outside world has gotten cold enough. Once the outside world gets cold enough, this thing is good for the winter, and your crops store beautifully. Now, very easily, you can do something like this in your home cellar. Pick a corner of the cellar next to a window, because you want to have that air ventilation. Block off any part of the window that isn't used for air ventilation so it's dark, and build some concrete block walls, very simple concrete block walls, to make a small little room there. Insulate that room from the rest of the cellar, the warm part of the cellar, keep the floor moist, keep the air convection going so it's cool, and you have ideal storage conditions for root crops for the whole winter.
Now, of course, if you live in the warmer part of the country, you don't need a whole underground root storage system, but we do have some ideas for you. So come, let's take a look.
In areas with a warmer winter, such as in this country south of the Mason-Dixon line, a buried barrel or can in an outdoor shed like this, with a good cover, may be all the protection your roots need for the winter. Just like the root cellar, it's cool down there, it's damp, and when you put the cover on, it's dark. So almost no matter where you live, there's some system that you can use to store roots and feed you and your family right on through the winter.
It's getting to be the end of summer, and any day now I'm afraid we're going to have a frost. And I hate it when my annuals get all cut down by frost and blackened at the end of summer. But I think I'm going to bring some of them indoors and pot them up and just have a little bit of color on my windowsill. Some annuals respond to this really well. For instance, this impatiens here. I often bring these inside. They adapt very well to it. I'm going to put it in this pot with some potting soil. It's got peat in it and perlite and some good compost and some garden soil. Just going to poke my fingers down in there to get rid of any air pockets and whump it up and down a few times. And go like whump to get it all in there. Now that's gotten kind of leggy. So what I'm going to do is cut this back. Seems like kind of a brutal treatment for it when it's still blooming. But frankly, it was getting so leggy anyway, it wasn't going to be all that attractive. And this plant has lots of nice new growth coming along at the base of the stems. So that when I bring that inside, water a little bit, it's going to now be a nice bushy plant rather than a leggy one. Now, I can do the same thing with these little wax begonias. Just, again, dig them up. Pot it up. and cut him back. Okay. Now, these coleuses, we could do the same thing with those, but you know, those are getting really leggy. I've been trying to pinch off these flowers to keep them going as long as I can and prevent them from going to seed, but they're so leggy that it's going to take them a long time to become beautiful in the house. So I'm going to use another technique. I'm going to make cuttings from them instead. And in fact, I could do this with the impatiens or the wax begonias as well. I'm just going to take the tip of this plant, just like this, about an inch of stem, could be a little more, and I'm going to root them in this soilless mix here, which is peat and perlite. Sometimes people use a rooting hormone compound when they take stem cuttings. They just dip the tip of the stem in this white powder that makes it root better. But we've got a natural homemade rooting compound here. I'll cut me some sticks from a willow tree. And willow has an amazing ability to root in anything. You can cut a branch of willow and stick it in the ground and it will root. So what it's doing in this jar of water is exuding that compound and making my own rooting material. So I'm just going to stick that in there, make a hole, and put that in. Let's take a few more. I always like this color, this rich red. Take off a few lower stems, tuck it in there, and maybe one of these pretty ones over here. Okay. There. Now, that's actually nice and moist. So I'm going to cover it up to keep it that way. I'm going to put some sticks on the edges here with some plant markers broken in half, and take this recycled grocery store plastic bag and make myself a little mini greenhouse here, just so that while it's getting a good start, it's nice and humid in there. I don't want to let it cook. I wouldn't put it in hot sunlight with this thing here. These are shade-loving plants anyway. But indoors, this is the way it'll be. Now, what I'm going to do is watch to see when new growth starts to form in the center of those plants. And at that point, I'll take each one up and put them in its own little pot to keep me company this winter.
Onions are one of the easiest and the prettiest crops to store. Easy, because they really don't require special conditions, and pretty, because you can put them together in a braid, like this garlic braid. They really look lovely hanging on the wall of the kitchen. But before you can harvest a good crop of onions, you've got to grow a good crop. And I'm going to show you a few of the tricks we use. First, we grow them in clumps like this rather than a row. In fact, when I plant them, I put 4 to 5 seeds in each soil block to grow the onion plants that I'm going to transplant out here. And then we set them out a foot apart each way. If you were using onion sets, you could do the same thing with onion sets. Put them in a little clump like that. Now, you get the same spacing you'd get if you put one onion every 3 inches in the row, a foot apart. But the important reason that they're growing in that clump is so I can keep them weed-free. And weed-free is a key to onions. No other crop suffers as much from weed competition as onions do. Why does this help keep them weed-free? Because I can cultivate in both directions. So I can take my hoe and very easily cultivate across and down the row. Across and down the row. There are none of those nasty little weeds right in between the onion row that are so hard to get. This is really the whole idea of gardening. Make it easy for yourself to keep the crop weed-free, and you're going to get a better harvest in the long run. And what does it look like at harvest? Well, there's no problem with crowding. You'll get nice big onions. They'll push each other apart and be growing in a clump like that. And once the tops go down, they're ready to pull and move on to the next step in the process. This is the final stage in your onion and garlic year. In order for these two crops to keep well, they have to be cured after harvest. And that means setting them out in a light and airy place where they can dry well. Use a hardware cloth mesh and set the crops out with their roots up, stems off to the side, and then you get a great drying process with the air moving through there. After about 2 weeks, you can tell they're done because the stem has become shrunken here, healed up, and no disease organisms can enter. When that happens, you have an onion and garlic crop that'll keep right through the winter. The beautiful onions we harvested 6 weeks ago are all cured. But this is another crop that benefits from being cured before storage. We pick our winter squash about the time of the first fall frost and set them out in a sunny spot so the sun can cure or harden over the skin for about 2 weeks and make them store better. If we're expecting cold weather or rain, I'll just throw a tarp over them. Now, for their storage for the rest of the winter, squash and onions require similar conditions. They like to be cool and dry rather than the cold and wet of the root crops. And most houses easily have a spot where you can find cool, dry conditions, like an unheated bedroom, a porch, or up in the attic, in which you can store these away and have the pleasure of eating them for the whole winter.
When I look at a harvest like this, I think this is what growing vegetables is all about. I see carrots with parsley and butter and honey on them.
Yum.
I see cabbage with some sour cream and baked potatoes with some butter.
Couldn't be better. A little attention to harvest and careful storage, and that can go on all winter. And I'm so hungry, let's go eat.
So for now, goodbye and good gardening.
Next on TLC, doing something for your home can be easy, even fun. Check and see here on Homebodies. Then, add value to your home with some serious improvements. The Home Pro shows you how.